to Tuesday. Thank you for telling me about the sound. Tonight, we are talking about ketogenic sweeteners, especially erythritol, which has been in the news recently due to the study that suggests it's linked to heart attacks and strokes. So tonight, I am going to discuss why you must be careful about those ketogenic sweeteners and why does it matter. I think you're going to be surprised at what my recommendation is. We are going to start with tradition, which is saying thank you for all being my sound check. It was one little thing that I didn't do, but when you've made the mistake this many times, I knew exactly what to do. So I am starting with the traditions that show you what I do, which is on this channel. I am all about the numbers and the science, and not that science, but the real science, not the one that makes the politics, but the one that truly keeps on giving in a way that keeps us all on our toes. I am going to start with checking my ketones and my glucose. And I'll tell you, my fast wasn't as perfect as I like it to be. Yesterday, my husband kidnapped me and said, "Lady, you need to slow down." And still no sound. No, sound is good. Yeah, you guys are all catching up. So ketones at 0.5, I expected that, and glucose of 72. That even though I got in the sauna yesterday and I did sauna on Sunday, and I did not eat anything yesterday, but I went to the beach with my husband, had my bubble water, and then I had a drink of his drink, which had some sugar in it. And I'll just tell you, it's amazing how that does set back my numbers when I do any sort of cheat that is in my fast. So insulin resistance keeps teaching me I have to check my numbers to keep it real as well. So do not feel like you're alone when you say, wow, my ketones aren't doing what they're supposed to. But I want to give a heads up for Karen, who says, yay for husband. Yes, he is what keeps me really not succumbing to the pathology that lives within me, which is, there's always something more to do at the office. So he stole me, sent me to the beach. We had a great afternoon, and I only did a little bit of work on the beach. We are going to talk tonight about some sweeteners and some of the science behind the sweeteners, because if you're following this at all, if you've looked at any of these news stories which have swept the headlines, I think you've gotten past the highlights. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to dive into what I think you should be focusing on, and I will loop you into that. Before we get into that, I have a couple of easy announcements. First of all, I'm really happy to tell folks that inside our store at bozmd.com, we do have raspberry back in the house. We are fully supplied. And that's saying something because I was not planning on being out of that as long. I thought it would be a lot quicker turnaround. But under products, if you click over, you will find the first product I ever made, which was the raspberry lemonade. It is the highest concentration of ketones in my supplements outside of Pucker Up. And you can tell whenever I check my numbers on the show and I use that, I don't even have any for me. So I have kept a secret stash of Pucker Up around though. And really, I'll be using that a little bit tonight. Not because I need to, but because I do like to show that when you use a supplement that works, it changes the numbers. So we're going to check at the beginning and the end. But that's not the most important thing I wanted to talk to you about. For those of you that do watch my Instagram, one of the things I did on the beach yesterday was I did a little reel because I have had, I don't know, maybe more than my fair share of folks writing in saying, hey, Dr. Boz, I have a question for you. Hey, Dr. Boz, I have a question for you. And so I did a reel yesterday saying, all right, come hang out with me. That's how you're going to get your questions answered in person and the fastest, and I'll be at KetoCon. I have I'm a little bit competitive. So when Robin asked me to dish out a promo code for getting folks to attend KetoCon, not only do I want you to come see my lecture, which I will show you a sneak peek about here in a minute, type in KetoCon, and when you go to buy your ticket, you should use promo code DRBOZ because I think only a couple dozen of you have used it. And I just think there should be more of you coming to KetoCon. Truly is one of the places where not only am I debuting this year's speaking lecture, which I'm giving you a sneak peek of right now. This has nothing to do with sweeteners. It is absolutely just me flexing, saying, look at where we're at with this. My folks that show up at the Pin Chasers to do our support group here locally got to see a tiny little sneak peek of this morning, where I was taking one of their lab results and going through it and showing them what is that thing that's on the page right there? What is a VLDL, and why do 50 nanometers matter, and what happens when it gets in circulation, and what are those little red things? Anyway, so I've been working on the animation to make the understanding of cholesterol easy. I am not done yet. I probably have 100 hours into this lecture that will only be 40 minutes, and you will not find it anywhere else except KetoCon. So come join me. I'm not going to give away any more of what I'm looking at here. We'll turn it to the other slide deck when I get to the lecture. But that attendance at KetoCon, I'm a little competitive, and I sure would like to see more people using that code. So, and I'd like to meet you. Honestly, it's really fun to see everyone's name in there. And for those of you that have taken my courses, I always love when the names that have been on the screen on Tuesday nights show up in a class, and I get to put a real person to who you are. So if KetoCon, if Austin, Texas is in your area, April 21st is when it starts. It ends on the 23rd. There's some other really great folks that I know, and I can't wait to see again there. Dr. Sean Baker and I have a very similar journey, and we keep ending up at the same speaking events. I think his audience and my audience have a very high overlap. So other folks that will be there are Dr. Mindy Peltz and I think Ben Azadi also. Again, all folks that I really am thankful to be a part of in this keto space. So we are going to talk about this study that was in the news this past week. And there's a lot of folks that have already put out some hour-long talks about the study and what's wrong with it and what is it, what's good about it. I'm going to hit the highlights on that because I think there is a section that folks are missing, and that is when it comes to these sweeteners. What is it about this one? But also, tell me more about why people should be paying attention to a couple other parts of the science that the sweeteners that we know about these sweeteners. So let me. Before I get into the little lesson, let me give you the punchline of what I thought about that study. Number one, the study that we're talking about will be in the show notes. I also have the study, probably my favorite review article that I looked at several of them, but this is one of my favorites. It just kind of goes through all of the science. So if you like getting into the nitty gritty and want to hear more in depth of what I would look at to get some of my answers, I would ask you to click on those articles that are in the show notes. All right. So the article that came out really had it had some flaws, but I don't think that they were all wrong in studying erythritol as one of the sweeteners that they looked at. What they were trying, the headlines all said, yes, erythritol is linked to heart attacks and strokes through blood clotting in the body. And they looked at it with a very interesting, something I actually did not know, is that we have erythritol. It's actually an alcohol sugar, a sugar that's got a little bit of chemistry shift to it. We put erythritol in our supplements out there by fermenting sugar. And it turns out as sugar spins through our Krebs cycle, there is a component that is erythritol in our body. And when you look at who makes more or less of this byproduct in our Krebs cycle, it turns out that it is you'll have higher blood levels of erythritol. like not consumed erythritol, but naturally made erythritol in your system when you have high blood glucose and when you have high oxidative stress. These are two key factors that cause heart disease. And so to say that, hey, that erythritol was higher in their blood, in fact, it was really high when we gave these 8 patients that they were looking to see what does erythritol do in their system. It was still high over a day after they consumed erythritol, and it linked to blood clots. So not only was there a whole bunch of things that I think they stepped over, I actually do want to give credit to the people who did the study because of a few things they were looking at, and when they were looking at studying erythritol as opposed to looking at some of the other sweeteners. So we have several studies out there that say, yes, erythritol is it's a sweetener. Let me go over to my slides really quick and just walk through some of the basics. For those of you that haven't looked into what I think folks should know about sweeteners, these are the alternates of how do we get that sweet taste into our system, how to, what do you use to, where'd my pen go? Well, I might not get to write on my iPad today, guys. Must have fallen on the floor. Nope. Well, we're not going to be writing on it. They are one of the sugar alternates. They are one of the ways we sweeten our food without without adding sugar. There are actually 3 categories to this. One is called non-nutritive sweeteners. The next one's allulose, and then the final one is the sugar alcohols. I'm just going to list you a few of the non-nutritive sweeteners. These are the ones like if you're really old like me, you remember Tab, that drink that was from the 1980s. Well, that has it's called Ace K. That's one of the non-nutritive sweeteners. Really old, approved in the 1980s. Aspartame, also very early 80s when that came to, and instantly my cheeks pucker when I think of these because I think they really tasted yucky. But that's what's in NutraSweet or an Equal. They're very safe. They've had several safety studies done, even looking at how much does it take to get toxic on them, and they really are safe. So when they throw out a headline that says it causes blood clots or it's causing clotting, it really is unsettling to us that have said no, they're very safe. But again, stick around to figure out what I think you should be worried about. Saccharin is another one of those non-nutrient sweeteners, super sweet, like 300 times the sweetness of sugar. Sucralose is another one. That's what's in Splenda. And of course, stevia is the latest in this generation, this trend of non-nutritive sweeteners. Stevia is supposed to be all natural because it does come from a plant, but it is very sweet compared to sugar, like 200 to 300 times as sweet. But it is also known for not impacting the glucose or not impacting the insulin. All right, so of all of those non-nutritive sweeteners, by far, stevia wins. Definitely the easiest to taste and not nearly as difficult. So we're going to skip to allulose, which is the latest on the scene, and then we're going to end with the sugar alcohols because that's where we're going to spend most of our time. Allulose is made from corn. So I think of a South Dakota corn farmer's daughter and saying, yeah, at least it's not the corn and beans that grows in the rows and rows and rows. It is it actually is a sugar. It's not as sweet as sucrose is. It's about 70% as sweet. And it's actually, and when you look at it chemically, it's just a mirror image of what sugar is. So it's chemically just kind of inside out, if you would, from sugar, but pretty, it doesn't cause a rise in your blood sugars, and it is processed through the body without any alterations. All right, so let's go here. The last one we're going to talk about is sugar alcohols, which is where our erythritol ends up. Erythritol is one of the 3 sugar alcohols, xylitol being another one. There's actually about 15 sugar alcohols. I wasn't sure if I had slides for these. Yeah, those are the 3. Monk fruit was the other non-sweetener. I forgot that one. And then allulose, again, it is actually a sugar, and it's not quite as sweet as sugar, and it is a mirror image of fructose. Again, all the things I wanted to say. Last but not least is our sugar alcohols, and that's where erythritol lies. Erythritol is the latest one of these sugar alcohols. Xylitol and sorbitol are actually, they're a lot nastier on your gut when it comes to erythritol of these sugar alcohols. And again, these are all fermented from sugar. They're changed, the chemicals change it from sugar and ferment it. But they're pretty efficient in the way they are absorbed, as well as excreted. Of all the sugar alcohols, this one, erythritol, is the easiest on the gut. I personally think they're all terrible on my gut. There is definitely nausea, bloating, and gas that happens when any of these sugar alcohols get in the system. They are very low calorie. I mean, they aren't a 0 calorie like the non-nutritive substances were, the previous slides, but they are very low calorie. So this is where I am going to come back to that scene and talk through what I think people should be focused on. So I have some notes over here, and if you want the super details of what I am pointing out, you can find it in those show notes. But I think when people are talking about using sugar substitutes in their improvement of their metabolic health, I wrote about this in my book, that there is an approach of ripping the Band-Aid off quickly or harm reduction. So the first time I ever heard harm reduction, I was in medical school and I was learning about HIV. Harm reduction was when they were giving out IV needles to people that were infected with HIV, and at least the needles were clean. Since then, harm reduction has been used in lots of different ways about how do you change a behavior that is leading to a serious detriment or a serious handicap of their health. What's the first few steps that you do to lower the abuse? So we have lots of other places in medicine we do this. When patients come in and they're on addicted to opiates or heroin, we use buprenorphine or Suboxone to dampen how their receptors and their brain are working in an addictive state. When it comes to alcohol, there's actually several receptor things that are, again, harm reduction to get them to back down on the alcohol before we say, hey, this isn't working. We need to go to rip the Band-Aid off, quit. You need to quit having alcohol. Again, having many years of advising people, I have my personal opinions of different chemicals. We're going to go through the science of that here in just a second. So here's some things that I think should be pointed out. I have notes over here, so let me use them. Number 1, eating causes an amplification of dopamine, meaning a ramp up of dopamine in your nucleus accumbens, which is very similar to what happens to people with substance abuse. So my forte in the last 25 years of taking care of patients is always, how do you get peak brain performance? And when you look at some of the addictive behaviors, I actually don't think it's an accident that I spent all these years working with several other addictive substances before I landed on, carbohydrates or the love for sugar. So when you ingest foods that are palatable, foods that taste good, it increases the dopamine production. It is greater than in standard foods. So when you take foods and you say, here are what we would call foods that don't have a link to sweetness, and then you add sweetness, which is how it gets to be ranked on how palatable is it, how easy is it for a baby to like. Sweet allows the highest uptick of dopamine. It's easiest to like those foods, so we call them palatable. So given that these palatable foods they stimulate the same pathways as drug addiction, It has it is suggested that when you take in excessive sugar, it can lead to this addiction. I don't need to have a long list of examples to show patients exactly what I mean with this. It only takes a few times inside a ketogenic diet, and then the relapses that happen as a consequence for those times on a ketogenic diet. They do really well, and then one little bite lands them in a ditch, and then the ditch gets full of mud, and then they get stuck, and then they're about 6 months before they ever say, "Oh, I got to get back on track." It's very real, especially in the number of times that patients have said, "Yeah, doc, I need to get sober," and they step into that arena of here's the steps that we can help you to get sober. And as soon as they have one drink, we don't see them for 6 months. So that same pathway in the nucleus accumbens that it leads to heightened production of dopamine with drug addiction is the same pathway that happens in people who have they eat excessive palatable foods. So long-term consumption of sugar causes withdrawal symptoms that have been observed, especially in animal models, to be as addictive as morphine and nicotine dependence. Food addiction leads to this same expression of dopamine receptors, and I'm going to show you some of the examples of that one in a slide here in a minute. When we look at the images through functional MRI or other neuroimaging that looks at the dopamine sensitivity in that nucleus accumbens, which is, again, this really important part for brains of addiction, we see that their dopamine receptors are decreased in how they listen, how it takes more stimulus to get them to feel better. And that's exactly the same pattern that happens in drug addiction. We see that in people who eat palatable foods over and over again. That is sweets. What the sweet does to the gut, what the sweet does to your blood sugar, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what it does to your brain. So I think that it's very, that it's inversely, that the dopamine expression is inversely related to your body mass index in obese patients. So as the body mass index goes up, the expression of the dopamine receptors gets lesser, meaning they're just not listening very well. They're very, especially the D2 receptor that's highly linked to that drug addiction. What this suggests is that there is a chronic exposure, that when you chronically expose people to sugar or those palatable foods, the sugar decreases, that decreases those receptors, and they are, it's like they get a dopamine deficiency the more they overeat. The more they overeat, the higher their body mass index, the less pleasure they're getting. And it's not just a theory. There are less dopamine receptors in their brain the longer they stick to those high sugar foods, those highly palatable foods. So when you look at the several areas of when people have chronic food, that excessive chronic sugar consumption, that there are modifications in both the metabolic side of their body as well as the sensory or nerve side of their body. The metabolic stuff we've talked about on this channel. That's where you're insulin resistant, your insulin receptors are higher. You've got they don't listen as well to the insulin. You have higher fat cells. They are less likely to put sugar out of the bloodstream. It gets stuck in the bloodstream. Those are all the metabolic sides. But as that chronic addiction, that chronic consumption of highly palatable foods, and I keep using this word palatable because I don't want you to think it's just, oh, well, that one has sugar in it. If I have a sugar substitute, it doesn't do the same thing. Yes, it does. That's the whole point, what I'm getting at. So as you look at the chronic nature of someone who is truly addicted to food. I think I put this one in here. No, I didn't put put that in there? Nope, I didn't. They have something called a cephalic phase response. And this is something I saw several blog articles just touch on and then hop right over. I mean, it is pretty interesting neuroscience, and the studies on them they're really well fleshed out in animal studies, but not so much in human studies, where we can see it happening. We just can't prove that it's the same thing that's in the animals. Where the cephalic response is when people say, "Doc, I can see calories and put on weight. I can see carbohydrates and put on weight." Well, the truth is that there is truth to that. Now, not put on weight, but put on that decreased pleasure sensation that happens when they're chronically addicted to palatable foods. All right, so let me see. I'm going to read this part because it's really the combination of learned responses with metabolic and sensory signals is a specific pattern of food intake. It responds to sensory inputs such as the taste, texture, sight of food, including the consecutive pre-absorptive physiologic response. That's what happens during this thing called the cephalic phase response, meaning they see the food, they anticipate the food. And when somebody has been chronically eating sugar, the changes in their brain start to happen. The hunger for the addiction, they cannot just stop at one bite. That's not just an accident. That is actually physiologically happening because of the way their brain has changed over the course of eating highly palatable food again and again and again. All right, so then here's okay. I'm actually going to read the rest or go through the rest of this after I show you these next couple of slides, because I think these slides will show you what am I exactly talking about. Is it, can it be said that, let's see if I can turn this in here. All right, so we are going to, I really wish I had my pen. So I want you to notice the word dopamine over there, okay, big highlighted dopamine. I'm going to show you, we're not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to show you several of these neurotransmitters that happen inside a brain. And of course, when I start to talk about this, I'm not going to talk about food. I'm going to talk about what is very well known to most of you. Let me just look one more time for my pen. I don't know where it is. I'm going to get done with the show and it's going to be sitting right in front of me. All right, so let's just keep going. So here is what happens when you see that the purple arm that's coming down from the top. There it is, yeah. GABA comes, binds in that receptor. It sends a message downstream, and that little shiny light was the stimulus of dopamine. And GABA is one of the many things that makes us feel pleasure, makes us feel happy. When you look at mimicking drugs such as alcohol, it goes to that same receptor. It parks in the same spot that the GABA did. And I don't know if you noticed that it was even more sparkly. That sparkly happened because it's parking there a long time. When it parks there chronically, again, your body's going to say, well, hey, you can use my GABA, right? But it goes to try and park there, and it doesn't have, there's no place for it to park. So the amount of GABA that it produces is less and less and less. A similar thing happens when you use benzodiazepines. They look like GABA too, but benzodiazepines are made to mimic alcohol. They are, if you want the alcohol to last for 5 days, we call it Librium. If you want the alcohol effect to last for 3 days, we call it Valium. 2 days, we call it Klonopin. 1 day, we call it Ativan. But all of them are parking in that exact same parking spot where alcohol did and where our GABA did. When it parks there that long, for 5 days, your body's like, forget it. We do not need to make any of this. What's supposed to happen is a recycling process, but that circuit gets burned when the parking spot is filled with a chemical such as alcohol. Here's just another prettier way to show that. So this is supposed to be a nerve where the signal is coming from the top and shooting to the nerve that's at the bottom. So we have one place where the vesicles of a neurotransmitter are being built and recycled, and then we have a place where they will swim across the synapse. They do not cross into the other nerve. They just stimulate the receptor and get recycled. So here's what it looks like. So if you take one of those little vesicles, it'll make its way to the end, and then it releases that neurotransmitter into that synapse, and it sends a message. As it does that, those little vacuoles empty. In order to be efficient with our resources, the human body, it recycles it up on the sides of that top neuron. So watch this. See that that's a little vacuum. So in fact, when I give you Prozac, or Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, Celexa, Wellbutrin, Effexor, it's blocking those little vacuums. It keeps that chemical in between the synapse because it blocks the reuptake. It blocks the vacuum. And indeed, it does help people feel better. But when we look at folks that are, let's go over to nicotine. So nicotine is designed to look like acetylcholine. Acetylcholine usually goes across, I don't know if you can see that pink one. I was supposed to draw this with my pen, but it would go across that synapse and bind. And that does its little thing until nicotine comes and binds in its place, which stimulates downstream the dopamine. And the more nicotine that's in that receptor, the longer it hangs out. Eventually, it decreases the signal for the body to make any of its own acetylcholine. So when they stop those cigarettes and say, well, I'll just make my own, they're super tired. There's no acetylcholine in there for their systems it's all empty. There's been no stimulus to make it. So that's why the withdrawal symptom from when people give up alcohol, they actually have depression for a long time because GABA, one of our hormones that's supposed to prevent the stimulus of depression, well, you haven't been making it. The signal to make it has been blocked. And you've still made dopamine, but over time, notice what happens downstream now, where the word dopamine is, watch what happens. So that nicotine still stimulates it, and at first you recycle it. But because there is the constant whipping of the body to try and make dopamine at too high of a level, the dopamine production also decreases, and you now just don't have as many in the vesicles. They can't stimulate it. This same process happens in people who are chronically intaking palatable foods. Palatable foods include these sugar alcohols, these sugar substitutes. That phthalate phase, I'm going to go back over to my this side and finish with that. So now that you've seen what I'm talking about, that it's not just a all right. So the final thing I wanted to go through was that when I did put this in here. I'm going to go back to my iPad. I said when sweeteners are not associated with calorie intake, their ability to sense energy is altered until you reset those vesicles inside the neurons that I just pointed out. It also, when sweeteners are not associated with calorie intake, so that is what erythritol is. Our ability to sense that energy was coming in becomes altered. And it eventually reduces the ability for us to use energy and suppress satiety. So let me just unpack that a little bit more. As you uncouple sweet tastes from energy, putting in sweet tastes, and let's just go back 300 years. Putting in sweet taste is supposed to be associated with a high amount of glucose intake. But as we have evolved to have sweet tastes end up on our foods that have no energy, they're low calorie, it weakens that condition of, how much pleasure are you going to get out of this bite? So now a super sweet taste that should give you plenty of joy and dopamine and pleasure is now muted. So then they start to eat more just like the alcoholic, just like the nicotine user, that consumption of the outside stimulus for that receptor becomes, well, it's there all the time. It's superhuman. It's supernatural. And as a result, the sweeteners say, oh, you're taking in energy, but it alters our ability to feel that energy. So even the worst way this decoupling happens actually is when they consume carbohydrates. So if you want the summary that I got to by the time I was reading all through these papers and looking through several of these studies was, well, here's the best way to take in erythritol. First of all, I do not think the study links to heart attacks or strokes the way they wanted it to. I think there are plenty of safety parameters for using erythritol. We know that it does help people lose weight in the short term. What I think people are missing is what it does to the neurologic reward for eating highly sweetened foods, and the price that you pay is in the chronic use of that. So when I got to the part that said, the worst thing that happens is when you take those sweeteners and you put them with a bunch of carbohydrates, or you put them with a bunch of small particles. So you take a pastry and you say, I'm going to make flour, and I'm going to make erythritol sweetened, I don't know, crepe, or erythritol sweetened croissant. I mean, just something that's filled with fine powder, fine flour. That would be the highest impact for suppressing the joy and the dopamine. It turns out the food that would be the best to put that on is fat or meat. So I'm not sure how palatable that would feel to say, here's a piece of a chicken drummy. Let's put some sugar on it. Let's put some sweetener on it. Maybe I guess you can make a barbecue sauce that has a little sweetener in it, and you can have it that way. Personally, I've done this dance many times with patients, and the harm reduction is real. The beginning, where they're trying to see, how do you count a carbohydrate? How do you decrease the amount of sweetness? I let them run their course in using the sweeteners at first. But about the time they get to ketoCONTINUUM number 5, where we're using time-restricted eating, we're going to be hopping over to a 36-hour fast, not too far after that, I really start to say, this habit is you got to look in the mirror and address this. You're not getting the kind of pleasure that you really wanted to get from your food. That my husband and I have a rule. He's deathly allergic to all this stuff. Not just that you get diarrhea, like stevia, he gets mouth ulcers and gets bloody diarrhea. Like I think I've told on the show before that when we were first figuring this out, if I wanted to know if stevia was in something, I would say, hey honey, take a bite of this. And if he got mouth ulcers, I'm like, oh, there's stevia in that one. Okay, I don't do that to him anymore. It got worse and worse and worse. But we both learned that I'm better off, and again, this is after I've lost most of the weight. Every woman could lose a few more pounds, but I've lost most of the weight. Most of my metrics are pretty good. That if I'm going to have a bite of sugar, it's going to be real sugar. It's going to be a small amount, and it shouldn't be more than once a month. I mean, it just shouldn't be. That's when I'm having it more often than that, I start to count down. I start to crave it. I start to want it. And I know that in the past where I've tried to say, well, I'm going to try. How's this new sweetener do? I think when allulose came on the market, I thought, oh, I'm going to try that. Oh my goodness, I was so sick. It didn't do anything lovely to my gut. And it really just triggered me to want more sugar. That whole addiction to sugar is something that I had hardwired into me for probably 20 years, 15 years at least. And it wasn't until I got on the ketogenic diet and really said, okay, I've got to decrease my want for that sugar. And by adding a sweetener, that whole cycle that I would see in people with drug addiction, man, it would turn right back on. It would turn right back on. Like, oh, I really want it. I would think about it. I would dream about it. I'm like, that's nuts. They call that a using dream when you're taking care of patients with addiction. All right, we are going to go over to your questions in just a minute. I do want to just take a minute to look back through several of the folks writing in and say, it's always lovely to see so many of you. There was one person here that I wanted to make sure I said hello to. I can scroll back on the side over here. Oh, Philip Hugh is here. I just wanted to say hello to you. Gail Johnson is another one I wanted to make sure to say hello to. Deb from New York. Karen Lee Edwards. Right at the beginning was I'll go way back. Oh, Jerry Cash. That was one who showed up at the beginning. Yes. Nice to see all of you. I'm going to go over to your questions here. Again, answering your questions is part of what I not only enjoy. When I do a lecture like this, I'm curious if it was something that you had any questions about. Where are the places where does this make sense? Or is it something that maybe you already knew it? I've talked about addiction before, but probably not to this level of neurotransmitters. So let's get over and take a look at your questions. Here we go. All right. So either I'm on the wrong page or there are no questions. Oh, there they are. I was on. Here we go. Holy mackerel, we got questions. Okay. So Bobby writes in and says, please discuss prolonged fasting for chronic kidney disease and retinopathy. Okay. I'll do that. I see the next couple ones are about the sugar alcohols, but let me answer Bobby's question first. So prolonged fasting with chronic kidney disease. So let me just start by saying, if you want to see the most irritating thing I see in the ketogenic world that I have to really work to not reply to, it's when people say, oh my gosh, fasting is bad for your kidneys. I can't do that. It's bad for my kidneys. The first person I like to point you in the direction of is my colleague, Jason Fung, who takes care of kidneys that need to go on machines for dialysis. And one of the first thing him and his partner, Megan Ramos, do is they have them fast for like 7 days. Now, in my program, I do not fast for 7 days. I don't have patients fast for 7 days, mainly because I'm after the long game. And I hope you're coming to me long before you need to see Dr. Fung or Megan Ramos about dialysis. They're great at it. They also do a lot more supervision when they put folks on those fasts. So Bobby, I answer your question in that to say some of the best experts in the world know that if you have chronic kidney disease, one of the most destructive things that you can do to the kidney is keep a high blood sugar. The reason someone would have chronic kidney disease with retinopathy or the destruction of the back of the eye is that the microvasculature, the tiny little blood vessels at the back of the eye, very similar in size to the tiny little blood vessels in your kidney, have been, they've been sacrificed. The chronic blood sugar that's been elevated, the chronic inflammation that's been elevated is your enemy. So when I look at folks that have these problems, I make no guarantees because it really depends on how long this has been going on. But the only way out is to lower the blood sugar, lower the insulin. And in my success, I don't have them start out fasting, but they definitely do get to the fasting part. I'll tell you that most people with chronic kidney disease and the retinopathy, they have several other health problems. If those are on the problem list, there's a whole bunch of other things that, their brain's probably not as sharp, their metabolism is pretty slow, their gut probably is not doing what it's supposed to, it's not as sealed as it needs to be, so they're probably deficient on several vitamins. So they have a lot of things we need the long game. We don't need the short game. So anybody with chronic kidney disease, I say I won't see you until you've got that workbook and you've got that figured out. And I usually have had them, looking forward to how, I don't have it all figured out how my clinic's going to work here in Tampa, but most people don't need to see me. They do need an intense course. They need to be shown how is it that I use this in the world of repairing people. And that's what we teach in that 21-day course, where you don't need me. You need a real example of how a support group works and how intense this can be. But Bobby, it's a long answer because it really means a lot to me. My dad died of kidney disease. His was probably from the chronic use of pesticides as a farmer. But when his kidneys were failing, the only thing that kept him functional and out of the hospital was that he was on a strict ketogenic diet. He had my mother to live with. So let's move on. Let's go to the other questions. Here we go. Lisa writes in and says, sugar alcohols can affect the gut health, right? Aspartame can be addictive. Both of those are true. I actually think that it's why when I look at the recommendations I have for sugar substitutes, unless they just can't make it through, the only time I have them use it is when they're putting in ketones. Again, I think ketones without any sugar substitute taste just fine, but that wasn't how my palate started out. I needed sweets. I wanted sweets. I craved sweets. When I throw the dice out for cost versus palatableness on your gut, stevia won when I was picking what sweetener to put into the ketone powders. The sugar alcohols, they were more expensive, and they just trashed their gut. Now, I did that knowing my husband's allergic to it. Like, he can't have those at all. So he does do the ketones in a capsule. He actually was the one who encouraged me to do this. I'm like, he chirps about the taste. It's called Pucker Up because it tastes like a really sour lemon. But there's nothing else in it, just beta hydroxybutyric acid. It is just liquid BHB, liquid ketones. And it raises ketones like you can't believe. So yes, the reason I stay away from sugar alcohols is I will gas my husband out of the bed if I do that. They're just awful. I think they just rip my gut up. And it's not just me. It's because it's really destructive to that the lining of your slime layer lining, your gut biome is the other name for it. All right. Fast Eddie's wife. Is there a trick to getting low glucose and high ketones? You mentioned it in an old live, like a 68 and 3.5. Yeah, there are tricks to it. The tricks are all in the long game. So Eddie, it definitely matters at where you're at on the spectrum as far as your health. If you're brand new to the ketogenic diet, if you're in that time where ketones are just a flood, you have a ton of ketones coming out of your system because you have lowered the insulin, you've lowered that glucose or lowered that carbohydrate intake. Boy, that chemistry shift is just amazing. Their ketones just rise up. Once you've had that ketogenic adaption, like they have that wave and their body says, okay, we're not in the business of wasting energy. We are trying to match the energy that you use. And that flood of ketones is way too much energy. Your body's not using it all. It's peeing it out. And although it's great because it'll bridge you that you don't die of starvation when the resources are low, what it will do is it will lower the production of ketones to what your metabolism is. And that's where we need to start boosting metabolisms, as well as feeding it in a way that that really is helpful. I'm going to show you something over here on. So there's a couple of places that let's go over here. Okay, so on our page, if you go to the front homepage and you scroll all the way to the bottom, there are several videos that people have uploaded. And I meant to tell you that earlier, but the reason I'm bringing it up now is there is one woman who put a 30-minute, I should put the link to her thing in my, so here are these videos where I ask people who've taken the 21-day course saying, put in a video and tell people about what you thought. And man, I was looking at them, I was watching them and then reading several of them, just delighted to see what this did for patients. So I encourage you to look at that. because you're going to hear a lot about what patients thought about the course. But there's specifically one person who did the hack that you're asking about, and she recorded it. I think she's called the Keto Woman podcast. That's not quite right. I wish I could think of her name. So I watched it last night. It's probably on my search history here on my YouTube channel, where she did the sardine challenge. So Fast Eddie's wife, one of the key things is to do a true sardine challenge. We do this with everybody in the 21 day, and we lower glucose and we spike ketones. It is truly a metabolic challenge where, again, we are really lowering the amount of carbohydrates. We are putting in portion control because you're eating only sardines. And that sardine fast does not start until the first sardine hits your mouth. As it does that, you can start the timer for 72 hours. The only thing they get to eat for 3 days, for 72 hours, is sardines. Well, this gal, she put her experience online, and I just sat there and watched it with a big smile on my face, and really saw that she, not only was she way better at cooking sardines and figuring out how to make them taste good than I am, but her experience of how she about how she handled it, about some of the things that were very stressful, like to give up, it is no carbohydrates. It is only cans of sardines for 3 days. But if you want to see your glucose go down and your ketones go up, 72 hours. The final hour of that 72-hour fast, you have to eat another can of sardines. The first hour, you don't start until the first bite. You do not start the timer until the first bite. Once you've had the first bite, that can, and now I encourage you to at least have 3 cans a day. It should be 3 to 5. You can have as many as you want. You can have as many as you want at any time you want, anytime you're hungry. There's no eating window. There's no eating hour. You just 72 hours of as many sardines as you want, and watch what happens. That's the secret. Okay, let's keep going. All right, Sarah writes in and says, new to keto, my hands and feet are swelling. I think it's because of higher sodium suggestions. Okay, so this is a great segue. I actually just did another video on this that'll be coming out, I think, in a week or two, that, yeah, you're going to need salt for this diet, but when you first get on this, you have to decrease the sugar while you increase the salt. And when you're doing that transition, if you're not watching things, it can be, well, you can hurt yourself. People on high blood pressure medications, they can see it really spike if they're not doing it right. I walk you through it very carefully in that workbook right there, ketoCONTINUUM. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on my website. Either way, that those steps of how you do that, especially if you've had years of not doing well, years of being too metabolically sick, which is high blood pressure, being overweight, especially around the middle. And then if you've got swelling in your lower extremities, that's another really important sign that you're probably struggling more than you think you are. I love this next question. Vio says, can a thickened gallbladder be reversed, or is it the only way to fix it to take it out? Well, it's been a few years since I've done a gallbladder one. I think I have an official gallbladder video out there because everybody asks about it. But some of my favorite stories about the ketogenic diet are through the gallbladder. Those were the first ones where I had the ultrasound. I had it in their chart that they had gallstones. And we put them on a ketogenic diet. And I was worried about the gallstones, like what's going to happen? Let's remind you what the gallbladder does. The gallbladder is there to hold bile. Bile is a secretion from your liver that you secrete out into your gut, into the area where your food is, and it will emulsify the fats, that you can absorb those fats, especially longer fats, but specific fats need to be emulsified by bile. So you have to have this around in order to produce, to absorb those fats and get them into your system. So when people have a thickened gallbladder, it's almost always because they've had high sugars and low fat. They haven't been using their gallbladder as much. It's kind of stiff and out of shape. So the first few times we ask you to squeeze it and it's thickened, it's usually swollen and inflamed. So if you go in and you only eat a ketogenic diet, you can sometimes, get a really sore muscle. And if the soreness is because, well, there's a little stone that's clogging one of the hoses, well, that can be actually a medical emergency. That part you need a surgeon for. But most of the time, it's not that. When you have, that waves of cramping pain that happen when you have a stiff gallbladder that's out of shape, it's much like, well, if you've not done squats for a while, do 50 air squats before you go to bed tonight. And then tomorrow morning when you get up to go to the bathroom and you say, oh my goodness, why does that muscle hurt so bad? That's because you haven't used it in a while and now you overused it. When you first go on the ketogenic diet, you can have a very strong workout for that gallbladder. Now, for those of you that don't have a gallbladder, your body learns to make the amount of bile that you need to emulsify the fat that you usually take in. In fact, during the sardine challenge, I tell patients that one of the reasons their ketones go up day after day after day is in part because your gallbladder gets, or the production of bile. If you don't have a gallbladder, then it's the production of bile. Your gallbladder and the production of bile get more, and they produce the amount of bile based on the history of how much fat you've been eating. So when they go on a ketogenic diet, they level up their amount of fat that they've been taking. And their gallbladder says, oh, we got a new formula. We got to keep up with this new way of eating. It doesn't do it on the first day. And so sometimes they have more diarrhea than they should because they can't absorb the fat. It's just they didn't make enough bile. The next day they make a little more. By the third day, they're doing a good job of secreting the amount of bile for the fat that they're swallowing. It matches better. And that absolutely is part of why, their satiety is so high by day 3, because gallbladders and satiety really do work together. And it's not without their own limitations of are they able to keep eating those sardines all the way through that final day of or final hour of that 72-hour fast. It's why I mark the sardine challenge by the first bite. Not like you do fasting where you say, okay, I just got done eating, now I'm going to start fasting. No, that's not how it works. You don't start the sardine challenge until the first bite of sardines. All right, I'm going to check my numbers again here. Even though I did a good job of not eating, that little bitty tease from husband's drink yesterday totally did it. It totally did it. I'm totally going to blame husband. I don't regret the beach. 664 is my glucose, and oh my gosh, ketones 7.4. I must have ketones on my fingers. I'm going to check it again. That can't be right. So if you touch that pucker up, you can make your numbers look really high. I'm just going to look one more time here. That's not the right color. I need this one. Ketones is 7.4. That can't it'd be great if that's how high my pucker up made it go. I knew I was on the rise because it's been, 2.5 days, about 68 hours since I've eaten. But, okay, let's try again here. All right, one more time on the ketones. Glucose is 64. Ketones. For those of you watching this on replay, I do have a really good, very well edited, 3.2, that's more normal. That I believe. A really well edited video on sugar substitutes. When we did the documentary with Michelle, one of the episodes was all on sugar substitutes, and she asked all the right questions and we answered them for you. It's a lot better edited than what I did tonight as far as the specifics about the different types of sweeteners. I hope you like this. I would love to know in the comments. I will see you next week, and if you like this, we'll keep doing more. I love talking